Welcome to Balanced Life with Debbie Carlin Boyle. Conversations connecting to a healthier you. The show that gives you all the latest and greatest health and wellness information to inspire you to live a life of balance and joy. Debbie Carlin Boyle is a health and nutrition coach, personal trainer, and fitness instructor who helps her clients live in balance with everything that feeds us, in addition to the food on our plate. Please welcome your host, Debbie Carlin Boyle.
Hello, hi everybody, and welcome. Welcome this beautiful Tuesday afternoon in Southern California. We are in the middle of August, towards the end of August. And if you're watching live, you know that we experienced our first in a very long time tropical storm this week. So we're all talking about how we've crawled out from under that. And for most of us, it was just a really steady rain. But there are parts of Southern California that were hit, and we do send our best to those people as they recover and get back together. And so now we have a beautiful after the rain day here in Southern California, and driving in, because I live about an hour away from the studio, and driving in, I can see some clear skies and beautiful mountain ranges, and that's what Southern California is all about. So I welcome you, as I enjoy this day, to my podcast. I thank you for joining me today. We have a subject that I think pertains to everybody. We're going to be talking about anxiety, stress, depression, how it plays into our everyday life, and getting some tools really to be able to deal with it. And we're going to get in depth with that with my guest today, who has written 2 books all about that. But before we go there, I want to tell you a little bit about me and who I am and what I do. So I am a personal trainer, a fitness instructor, and a health and nutrition coach. And I help people balance out their life. There's so many things that feed us, and talking about our emotions and our mindfulness and those kinds of things, which we're going to hit on today. The other things that feed us besides food happen to do with our careers and our families and our environment and what the products we use or what we choose not to do, and our sleep. And so many things have to come together and be united in order for us to live a life of what I call longevity with quality. Because longevity with quality means that we're going to live a life of joy and happiness. And I think that's most people's goals in life. So I help people do that. I help people reach those goals because, like what we're going to talk about today with the subject of depression and anxiety, I help people through actionable steps. I give them a toolkit and tools, and I coach them along each step of the way to live that kind of life, to find that joy, that longevity and quality to age young. Because I'm no youngster myself, and I found at an early age all those things that had to come together to get to that, and how to handle the things that bring us back down again, come back to a balanced level. So in order to get a hold of me, you want to go to my website, which is Balanced Life by Debbie, DEBI.com. And there you're going to see a pop-up, and right away it's going to say Summer Detox. Get your free one here. And if you log and check on that, you'll be able to get a 3-day summer detox with recipes for 3 meals a day that are healthy, satiating, and make you feel lighter on your feet. And we're still in summer. I think the hottest month is yet to come, because that's usually September here in California. So, we want to feel light. We want to get a jump start into the fall. We're still wearing our bathing suits and getting in the water. So go ahead and pop on there. Also, if you want to work with me, there's a place to just put in your email address, and I will cut right back to you. You'll get that detox, and you'll also be able to talk to me directly, and we can set up a time to do an intake call if you like. So I feel that everybody in life needs a coach for either something that's they're having trouble maintaining or something they're passionate about, whether it be a sport or whether it be a weight loss journey or a hormone imbalance journey, whatever it may be. I think everybody needs a coach. A coach needs a coach. So I invite you to go ahead and reach out to me. And if it's just to say hi, I'm a people person, so I like to say hi, and I'll reach right back out to you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about our show today and how you can become involved with us if you're watching live. So if you're watching live, you can call in directly and interact with me and my guest. So the number here is area code 323-524-2599. Again, it's 323. We dance to this, don't we, Tony? 524-2599. So call in anytime. Ask a question, make a comment. We want to hear from you. We want the conversation to go where it organically goes, not necessarily sit here and do a question and answer interview. So chime in if you could. If you're not listening live or you don't want to call in, you can also go to my Facebook page, Balanced Life by Debbie, DEBI, and write Facebook. And right there in the comment section, you can make a comment, ask a question. I check throughout the show, my Facebook page, because I'm streaming live there as well, has my YouTube channel. And so if there's a comment or a question, I can bring that to my guest and we can start interacting with you that way. So, and if you just want to write in there after the show, we will get back to you. I get back to people sometimes. They'll chime in 5 years after a show is run. So there you have it. You can become part of this conversation anytime you listen to this podcast. We want to hear from you. So we're going to get on with the show today. I'm really excited to introduce my guest. Statistics show approximately 280 million people in the world have depression, and depression is about 50% more common among women than men. So what's going on? Why do people get depressed? Brian Sachetta is the author and owner of Get Out of Your Head, a brand and book series that seeks to help people overcome anxiety and depression. By trade, Brian is a software developer, and he combines his experiences in the tech world with previous mental health battles to draw parallels between computer systems and the human mind and give readers practical strategies for evading their own psychological demons. Brian currently has 2 books on the market: Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety, and Get Out of Your Head Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. His mission is to help as many sufferers as possible through not only these books, but also his blog and now podcast appearances. So let's get to it. Will you please welcome to the show, Brian Sachetta. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Debbie. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good. Now, we know you're calling in. You're coming to us from Boston, so I know you're on the East Coast, so we probably have East Coast listeners. I know it's later in the day. I thank you for joining us. I know it's the end of a day, and sometimes people just want to wind down, and I thank you for being accessible to do a live show with me.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
I want to learn a little bit about you and your background. And I like to start from the beginning, like where you were born, what your family was like, what your schooling was like. And then, obviously, I alluded to in the introduction that you had some struggles with depression and anxiety in your own life, which is what led you to write the books. So I want to hear a little bit of that backstory and how you got to where you literally sit today, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, let me figure out where to get started, right? So have lived in the Boston area for most of my life. I grew up in a town called Linfield, small suburb just north of Boston. I have a brother. I have 2 amazing parents. I had a great childhood, great upbringing. Not a lot of complaints there. I think not too many traumas that occurred, anything like that. The interesting thing when I talk about my upbringing, people will say, kind of doing the old sit on the psychiatrist couch and dig up old memories and whatnot. I don't have a lot of traumatic memories. I don't have a lot of too many struggles as a kid, and I'm very grateful for that, right? I've lived a pretty good life or had a great upbringing. I think for me, it was sort of, and if I talk with either my doctor or psychiatrist or whatever, they'll say, it's just kind of wired into you, right? Anxiety, depression, the way that your mind works predisposes you to these sorts of battles. So it was, getting into high school and really starting to have to get to the point where you should try to blossom socially or in your different pursuits and endeavors and whatnot. And I struggled a lot because I ran up against these feelings, right, that I eventually figured out were anxiety and depression. And so it took a long time for me to put a label on those things. Number one, because my parents, my family, we are not a clinical family, right? I don't think I have any doctors in the family, to be honest. And if I do, I'm sorry that I'm blanking on that right now. But so it took a little while to figure out what those things were. And then there's also the whole, I guess, when I was 17, 18 as a dude, it was like, I didn't want to talk about this stuff. I didn't want to talk about my emotions. I didn't want to be vulnerable. So it was a combination of not knowing what I was up against to begin with, but then also not really doing myself any favors by holding in what it was that I was dealing with, right? Because
you were very young. I'm just going to chime in for a second. When you were very young, as a teenager, even preteen, do you remember being anxious about, like, maybe before a test or before, like, an athletic sport or something? Do you have memories going back to being anxious about certain things at a younger age, even before college?
Yeah, I've definitely got some, right? In middle school, whether it was giving a class presentation or having an athletic event, as you alluded to, some of those things, right? It was like, oh, I'm nervous about it, but couldn't really find the terms for it other than that word, nervous, right? I didn't actually know that was anxiety. It was just like, oh, I got this thing coming up and I'm scared or I don't feel good, right? So that was a difficult part of it, but it didn't, all of the, like the real struggles didn't blossom until it was really in high school and college when it, it was like, okay, I have to go make a life for myself, so to speak.
That's
I have to
always
start
anxious.
dating. I have to, kind of go out there and maybe find a job or whatever it is. All those things. Whereas I think when you're in middle school, not to say that you can get nervous in any situation, right? If the cards are dealt the right way, but I think just more the pressure gets a little bit higher as you kind of come into your own or get into adulthood and you get into more intimate situations, things that have a little bit more pressure, or you put more pressure on yourself given the stage of your life.
I agree. I think sometimes the older we get, the more we tell ourselves those stories in our head, which is why you wrote the book in the first place, is to get out of there and stop telling those stories about things that we have no control over because we don't know what the outcome in the future looks like, and so, and that's where a lot of anxiety comes from, is the stories in our head that we're making up and how it could possibly end for us. So when did you realize there was an issue and, you had a little battle on your hands, an internal thing going on?
Yeah, it was one of two occasions. They're both pretty prominent in my mind. It was kind of more with the second one. It was harder to push everything off after this second event had occurred. So it was back-to-back panic attacks while I was on dates with different women, or at least hanging out with different women. So one was when I was 17, I was in high school, I was a senior. And then the second one was probably 5 to 6 months later, right as I got to college, with a girl that I had met on campus that I took a liking to. And both of these events, it was like, they kind of called me out for being really nervous and my heart racing and kind of my body shaking and whatnot. And it was humiliating. Like, I'm not going to lie, right? At the time, I didn't want to talk about any of this stuff to anyone because I wasn't ready to be emotionally vulnerable with anyone about this stuff. But I think I probably perpetuated my own suffering by not talking about those things. But I guess to get back to answering your actual question, after the second one, it really hit me in the face, right? It was like my second week at college, possibly my third week. I forget exactly, but I woke up, I was like, oh my goodness, it happened again. I had another panic attack in front of this girl that I liked. And I now cannot ignore the fact that I have something of a problem, right? I have this barrier in front of me that is, at least right now, telling me that if I want to, be intimate with women that I like or get into a relationship, whatever situation that I'm looking for regarding intimacy or a personal relationship, I have this issue that I have to deal with, right? And so that second event, both of them really, but the second event was more me waking up and saying, if I want to be in a relationship, which I do want to be, I feel as though I can't be in that relationship until I get some closure here or some catharsis or just some healing.
So wait, so did those panic attacks, did they play out in front of the other girls, the girls that you had the date? They did. And
Yes.
what does a panic attack look like for people that don't know? I mean, all panic attacks are different. There are no two people that have anything the way it plays out alike. But for you, how did it play out?
For sure. I would say the general theme across all panic attacks is extreme intense nervousness in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was heart racing, sweaty palms, couldn't think straight. Heart racing so hard that almost the whole body is shaking. My whole body was shaking. And so I guess when you're in that intimate situation or whatever, whether you're sitting next to the person or talking to them or whatever, like if you are visibly shaking, right, because you're so nervous, then it's possible that that person is going to pick up on that. And, with the second one, it was like, this girl that I had taken a liking to, she was texting me and she's like, I'm going to come over. And I could tell based on her text that she had a couple drinks. And this wasn't one of those I stutter to say it sometimes or struggle to say it sometimes because this is not like a Me Too situation or anything like this. This was like, I really liked this girl or, at the time had taken a liking to her. And I was just so nervous. I was like, regardless of if she has had a drink or she's had 0 drinks, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do in this situation. I don't have a ton of experience here. I'm nervous, right? And so she immediately, she comes over sort of unexpectedly, right? Like I was actually walking down the hall trying to clear my mind and she just appears out of the stairwell in front of me. And I'm like, oh goodness, I'm not calm yet. I don't know what to do. And so realizing that I was about to go into another panic attack, I was like, okay, I'm in the middle of the hallway, near the study lounge or near a lounge. Let me sit down and just try to act cool, right? And so she just jumps on top of me and immediately feels that I'm really nervous. Like my heart is racing, my body is kind of shaking. And she just gets up, screams at me, calls me all sorts of names, runs away. And I'm like, so humiliated. I'm trying to run after her and save this relationship sort of, but also at the same time, I really just wanted to go home, right? I was so embarrassed.
Well, she was the drunk one, though. I mean, it seems like you dodged a bullet on that one. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how that night played out, but that sounds like a drunk jumping on you, not giving you a chance to even say hi or, it just seemed like a drunk episode to me.
Yeah. I mean, looking back on it, right, I think we can all kind of do the thing where we say, okay, at 18, that felt like the end of the world. I really liked this girl and it was clear that this was not going to work out. Looking back, I'm like, look, if that didn't happen, wouldn't have written my books, wouldn't have had this brand, wouldn't have been able to help people. So there is a positive light there, sort of a silver lining. At the same time, I don't tell these stories to speak poorly of any of these people. I haven't talked to this girl in a long time, but I remained friends with her at college. And it was kind of always this that was awkward. We don't know what happened there, but she's a good person. And it wasn't, I don't think any less of her because of the way that happened. It was just that for one reason or another became a formative moment for me and sort of set sort of the rest of my life, almost got me on some different path that then took me to different places. Right.
Right. No, understood. Yeah, which is good because, I mean, yes, you identified what a panic attack and was familiar to you. It had happened before, what it was, and it did bring you to where you are today. So moving forward, what happened that you realized that you had anxiety and that you were prone to these attacks, and how were you able to deal with them? Do you have some therapy back? Did you go to therapy?
Combination of a lot of different things. So to answer, I guess the first part of the answer is that, that next day after that second panic attack, I was so embarrassed, so humiliated that I was like, I have to find an answer. And I guess maybe at 18, I was like, there is an answer and I will find it today and I'll be good. Right. I think you get a little bit older and you say it's a sort of a body of knowledge that you have to continue adding to, and everybody's on their own path and there's twists and turns and all that. But so the second part of the answer is basically just that I tried a lot of different things, right? So I went to therapy for a little while. I was working with psychiatrists. I tried medication for a little while, and then I was reading a lot of books. I was reading a lot of journal articles. I sometimes say, I listened to a lot of audiobooks, but so this was 2008. At that time, there was no such thing as an audiobook. It was maybe a book on tape or a book on CD or something, which, is the same, but it wasn't audible, so to speak. So I was trying all those different avenues, right? Trying to just figure out, it's like, what works for me and what doesn't.
But
And
you
so
did go on an antidepressant, you said.
Yep.
You
So I was on an SSRI for, I would say, 9 months.
And did it make a difference? Did you notice a difference or not? And that's why you kept pursuing.
Yeah, for me, I didn't notice too much of a difference, to be honest. I felt as though, I don't know, I just felt as though there were things in my life that I wanted in a certain fashion, right? It was like, to me, I felt as though on the depression side, there was a gap between reality and my expectations. And then on the anxiety side, it was like, it wasn't as though I was taking Xanax, right? So it wasn't, something that was, I guess people would call like an emergency drug that you take for a specific situation. The SSRIs are meant to be like more, you're building up these reserves and you're changing the way that your mind works a little bit. And maybe you're less predisposed to anxiety, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like you'll never have it again. And this is not to, disparage medication. I think that it can be an amazing avenue for a lot of people. It can save a lot of people's lives, and it has saved a lot of people's lives. I think that the overall gist of what I'm trying to say here, though, is that we all have to try out all these different strategies and all these, healing modalities and see which ones work for us, and then start to filter out the ones that don't, and kind of almost, as the sorry for the plug here, but as the subtitle of my first book alludes to, create a mental health toolkit with all these different tactics and all these different plans in there that help us cultivate mental health.
Yeah. And that is definitely, me coming from, I'm a health practitioner and advocate, and there are side effects to any drugs, including antidepressants. So being able to have tools in a more natural, healthy way, I'm all on board with that completely. Let's get to how would you define anxiety? We kind of know what a panic attack is now, but how would you define anxiety? And then I want to define depression, and then I want to, break down that toolkit of yours if we could.
Sure. So I would define anxiety as future-oriented fear, right? So it's that same feeling that we get when we are afraid of something, but it is geared toward the future. So the distinction that I like to make is, if fear is standing in front of a bear right now, anxiety is thinking about standing in front of a bear in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks, in a year, whatever it may be, and having that same sort of feeling, right? And I think the sort of the last distinction to make is, what's the difference between being nervous sometimes, being fearful sometimes, and actually having anxiety, right? So if we are talking clinically and getting into the realm of having a quote unquote disorder, then it would be anxiety or fear, whatever label we want to put on it, that prevents you from living the life that you want to live, or at least living normally, right? So if it's like, I am overwhelmed by my anxiety on a daily basis, such that I can't get out of bed or I can't get in my car and drive to work, that is definitely, in the realm of an anxiety disorder. Whereas if somebody says, I get nervous when I have to give speeches to, in front of my whole company, that, don't get me wrong, that could still very well be anxiety, but it's situation oriented, and it might not necessarily fall into the disorder piece if you are still able to get up there and give that speech.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes nerves propel us too. We can use it to our advantage. Yeah, it gives us a little adrenaline, which we don't want to live with on a day in, day out basis. But for those moments, adrenaline can really be handy, actually, because you can use it to keep you propelled and interesting and effervescent and that kind of thing. So in those cases, sometimes it's good. But like you said, if it's a constant and every little thing, I have a daughter who suffers from anxiety, and she found her own path and ways to deal with it, similar to what you did, but not write a book about it. And one of the things that she used to do, and then I realized this is not working, she has to change something in her life right now, is one of the things that she used to do, she was an actress. And so the thing that she would get anxious about was the idea of, even before she went to the audition. It wasn't, once she was on the set and she was working, she was totally fine. She was amazing. but it was all the pre-stuff, and it was all the stuff in her head leading up, like you were saying, the definition of anxiety, the stuff you put in your head that leads up to something you're gonna do that you haven't done yet, based on maybe an experience of one time or one thing that didn't go exactly the way you wanted to. Now everything is going that way, or stories that you've heard that has happened, or things that you've seen on TV shows or news or whatever. So every single audition was that way. And one day I just said to her, I don't think this is for you. This is not working for you. We sat down and had this conversation. Are you happy? Are you happy about this buildup of what you have to go through? And then, LA traffic, this was before COVID and before everybody's kind of doing their auditions at home. But, that all of those things that were going to lead her into that room, and then showing up in that room with 100 other people that did or didn't look like her, that she was comparing herself to, just made her want to throw up and leave. And, is that worth it? And so we really had to weigh out the pros and cons of that. It wasn't. And she found her place in the world and where she belongs now. And I'm so glad. She still suffers from anxiety over certain situations, but she has a better grasp on how to deal with it, and knowing that this is behind her and she doesn't have to deal with that ever again, at least this stage in her life. So I personally haven't experienced it. I just get nervous and I'm situational. But to see my daughter go through that so drastically, I get it. And I'm sure that listeners and everybody can relate to that, if not for themselves, but for somebody they know, just knows they're going through that. We're going to take a really quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk about depression and what the difference between anxiety and depression is. I believe anxiety can lead to depression, but maybe what depression, your definition, what causes it, and then let's get into the book and all the tools you have for helping people. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after a word from one of my sponsors. Cicera Olio de Oliva is an extra virgin olive oil company with a mission to provide high-quality, current-season Italian oils to families. They have partnered with 2-centuries-old family farms in the Tuscany region of Italy to grow, harvest, and bottle their amazing oils. Founded by a nutritionist who has a love of the land, sustainability, nutritious foods, and of course, Italy, they strive for a peak freshness and high nutritional content in every single bottle. All of their oils are current season, extra virgin olive oil, bringing you a true branch to bottle experience, and I know firsthand. So, for an offer, go to www.cesarioliva.com and enter Balanced Life 10 for 10% off. I know you're going to love this healthy and delicious addition to just about any meal. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me today. We're talking all about anxiety and depression with my guest, Brian Sachetta, and he's written 2 books, Volume 1 and 2, on Get Out of Your Head. And one is more about anxiety, one's more about depression, which is what we're kind of breaking down right now. And if you'd like to be part of this conversation today, you can call in. The number here is 323-524-2599. Call in, ask a question, make a comment, get involved in conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Number's up on the screen if you're watching us live too on my Facebook page or our YouTube channel. Okay, Brian, let's break down what depression is and then the difference between the two and what causes depression.
Yeah, let's do it. So to put a definition on depression, what I like to say, just to keep it broad, right, is to say that depression is a pervasive state of hopelessness and helplessness. It's prolonged despair, if you will. And if you look at the different kinds of depression, right? So there are a lot of different varieties of this, I guess I would say more generic label of the disease, right? So there's seasonal affective disorder, there's postpartum depression, there's dysthymia, there's major depressive disorder. These are all different sub flavors of depression. And if you look at each of them, I'm simplifying things a little bit, and I'm not trying to make light of them. What I'm trying to say is that if you look at each of these diseases, you can say, okay, how long and how pervasive is my hopelessness and helplessness going to be? I guess you might want to start the other way and say, okay, I have SAD, right? Seasonal affective disorder, basically being low mood in the wintertime. You could peel it back and basically say, given the fact that you have SAD, we can assume that you are likely to be feeling a little bit helpless, a little bit hopeless for like maybe 3 months. And it's not going to be super, super extreme, but you're going to feel a little bit lousy. We can go through all the different flavors of this disease and say to ourselves, like, okay, again, how strong is that feeling? And then how long is it going to last? And that gives us sort of a definition for each of the more specific versions of the superclass, I guess, if you will, of depression itself.
And what do you think? Is there, what is the difference between anxiety and depression? Is there a way to ward off going down into the abyss when you have such anxious moments? Like, I worried about my daughter back then, that she was going to go into a dark place and hit depression. So I knew we had to move her out, and she did work with the therapist and stuff, and we had to move her out of that where she was going. How do they relate to each other?
Yeah, I like to try to keep things simple, right? So if anxiety is, and I'm going to try to keep it PG as well. If anxiety is scared crapless, then depression is utterly hopeless, right? And so there's a study that we can point to or look at it. I think it was done out of the University of West Virginia with a guy named Jefferson Frisbee, I believe is his name, if you can believe that. Might have his first name wrong, but anyway, so he ran this protocol. It's a protocol called the UCMS protocol. It is the unpredictable chronic mild stress protocol, which is basically like a way to make people or the subjects of your experiment anxious, right? So in this specific experiment, they said, let's put a bunch of rats or mice into cages. Let's expose them to stressors that are unpredictable. They are chronic, as in they last a long time or they keep repeating, and mild, as in they're not like so overwhelming that these mice just, I don't know what the right word is, end their lives or something. But it keeps them in a heightened state, right? And so the reason why I say scared crapless to utterly hopeless is if you expose mice and humans as well to these stressors that don't go away, they're hard to predict, they're mild, they're not so overwhelming that you just run away from them immediately. What happens is your nervous system at first will, and by at first, I mean within, let's say, the first couple weeks or the first couple months of being exposed to this protocol, your nervous system will rev up. Your fight or flight nervous system will get going, which is the acute stress response, right? But what happens is after a certain amount of time, let's call it a month, right? I'm just going to make that number up, is if those stressors are still there, you get to the point where you say to yourself, why even bother, with the reaction? Why try to get away from them? Because, the evidence has shown that in a month, I haven't been able to get away from them. And so, again, going back to that scared crapless to utterly hopeless, the utterly hopeless piece is the learned helplessness of saying, I'm done with this. I have given up. I'm not even going to try anymore. This acute stress response, let's shut it off. And the body even does that sometimes too, where, we go into this state that some people sometimes call it anhedonia, which is basically the inability to feel pleasure, right? Is like that stress response is gone because our bodies on some level know that this stress is just going to be there. And so I think it's really important for us, because these two diseases are related, it's really important that we don't get to that point of the utter hopelessness, because once we're there, we're in that proverbial abyss that you related to or you alluded to. And once you're there, it becomes harder to get out of that spot, because I'm not going to say it's a resting place, right? But it's definitely like you've fallen sort of, you got to the edge of the cliff and then you fell. And getting back up on top of that cliff can be difficult.
Big time. I imagine big time. And so many people are going through it. I mean, I see people that 2-3 of my clients have dealt extremely with depression. And that's why they came to me, because they were on medication. They wanted to get off medication. One of them was suicidal. So when you're saying when you give up the hopelessness, she was suicidal. She had attempted. Her mother came to me and said, she needs help. What can we do? And one of the things, and I'm sure this is in your toolkit because that's what I want to get to now. One of the things that I think is so important is how you take care of yourself. And starting with the number one thing for me, usually in everything in health, is food. What are you putting in your body? Because your body, your gut-brain connection. So dark thoughts can come from a really bad diet because your body's really struggling to assimilate because it's not getting the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that our bodies need for us to thrive. And that connects to your mind. So you go to a darker place. Now, granted, that's separate from incidences and things that are being thrown at us and situations that we're put in, whether it's taking an exam or going to court or whatever it might be. Those are separate individual things. But if you're constantly building up with bad healthy habits and you're not sleeping because you're not eating right, you're drinking or abusing your body, you're not moving it, these things are going to just exaggerate and make, pile up and make it much worse for you to try to find your happy place and your healthy place. So how do you help people? Tell us a little bit, break down your books for us, if you don't mind, on some of the tools that you suggest for people to get out of their head.
For sure. So there is a lot that we could cover. I'm going to have to distill things down, right?
Yes.
Because 2 full books and
yes.
a lot of different tactics.
Yes.
Why don't we quickly start with anxiety and then we can go into depression?
Yes.
So on the anxiety side, the reason why I say it's more of a toolkit there is there are legitimate strategies and tactics that you can pull out and use in the moment. That is a little bit easier to do with anxiety because anxiety is closely related, if not equivalent, to that acute stress response that we get in our bodies, right? So it's like if there's a stressor that comes in front of us and our fight or flight nervous system revs up and we equate that to the feeling that we know as anxiety, then to get that anxiety to go away, we need to get that acute stress response to quiet down, right? So from that frame of mind, let's talk about a couple different tactics that we could use. The first one that I talk about a lot on podcasts, and it's not meant to be obvious or it's not meant to be flippant or anything like that, is to do some deep breathing. So when you do a deep exhale, you activate the opposite of the fight or flight nervous system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And so what I like to say to folks is when we get revved up, when we get scared, our breathing becomes shallow and quick. And the issue with the shallow and the quick breathing is that we aren't allowing ourselves to get a full exhale. And if we're not doing deep breathing at all, then we're not doing a full inhale, and then we're definitely not getting that full exhale. So it's important that we get a full exhale and do deep breathing in order to get our fight or flight nervous system to calm down and to get our parasympathetic nervous system to come back online, right? Because if you look at some of the other terms that are given to the parasympathetic nervous system, they might call it, people might call it the feed and breathe system, the rest and digest system. Those are all good things that we want to foster, right? And one of the most reliable ways to get that system to come back online is to do some deep breathing. And I think the other important piece of breathing is that once we get that fight or flight nervous system to calm down a little bit, not only does the parasympathetic nervous system come back online, but also the ability to form more coherent thoughts, to think a little bit more logically. And, this is a little bit of a double-edged sword because sometimes we can make ourselves anxious with our thoughts, right? But on the other, I guess, side of the coin is if there is a stressor that's in front of us, and we're all, or a stressor that's, let's say, on our calendars 2 weeks from now that we're scared about, if we are able to calm ourselves down and re-engage some of that, the logic circuits of our brain, so to speak, we might then be able to say to ourselves, oh, wait a second, I have all these other tactics in my toolkit that I can now pull out. Because what happens sometimes, right, that acute stress response is meant to help us survive, to evade dangerous situations like at the drop of a dime, right? And so when that acute stress response revs up, we don't have time necessarily to be like, oh, well, I've got tactic A and I've got tactic B and whatever. And so the reason why I lead with the breathing a lot of the time is it allows us to get back to that mindful place to say like, okay, like I know I'm scared and I'm nervous and there's something going on a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, whatever, but that, that thing isn't going to kill me, and it's also not here right now. So now that I'm feeling a little bit more calm, let me go back to the toolkit and pull out a couple other strategies. So let me cover one more, just because I know that being a little bit long on this one. But so once we've gotten to that place of awareness, that place of having the logic come back online, right? One thing that I like to do for myself is I like to repeat a mantra. So a mantra, I think a lot of people who are listening would be familiar with them. I would say it's just a short, powerful phrase. And we want that, we want that power to be positive, not negative. We could definitely have a negative mantra if we wanted to, but I guess why would we, right? So pulling a short phrase out and repeating it to ourselves, maybe even incorporating some sort of movement with it, whether it's a jumping jack or, hitting our chests or clapping or something like that. The intention of reciting a mantra is it's to get you out of your head, but it's also to put that a different way, shift your mindset, right? Basically say, okay, I know that there's something on my calendar 2 weeks from now that I'm scared of, and that is all I'm focusing on right now. But if I repeat a mantra to myself and I for example, right? So I might say a mantra that I like to use is if you get in your head, you're dead. So I might say to myself, if you get in your head, you're dead. If you get in your head, you're dead. If you get in your head, you're dead. And it's almost like just continuing to repeat that to myself almost puts me in this like not lullaby state, but it gets me, it diverts me from the chaos swirling in my mind. It allows me to pivot a little bit. And so all of the strategies that I talk about on the anxiety side, to coincide with the brand itself, are just centered around helping you distract yourself from the chaos that's swirling in your mind. And then eventually through, getting out of that chaos, allowing yourself the chance to have that acute stress response tamped down a little bit.
Right. Wow. That's good. Those are good. Those are the in the moment when your adrenaline is pumped up to kind of get you calm down and think about before you do things. That's a good one. And what are some other that are in that toolkit just for anxiety? And then we'll jump into depression in a minute or two.
Yeah, for sure. So another one that I talk about, I say, essentially try to look at the situation a little bit and reconnect to the importance of it, right? So sometimes we find, and this is like, I'm not casting any judgment here. This is just how the brain and body work, right? Is when we get caught up in these stressful situations, our minds play these tricks on us. And they almost put us into this state where we like almost detach ourselves from the event or the stressor that we are dealing with, right? And so, for example, if I have a job interview next week and I'm nervous about it, I go into my head, I ruminate, I think all these thoughts, I get really, really scared. Over the course of time, whether it's 5 minutes, an hour, 5 days, I and I think all of us have, and again, this is not casting judgment, just how the body works, is we have the tendency or ability to blow things out of proportion in our own minds. And so we can then look back and potentially say to ourselves, like, this is something that we would do sort of more in retrospect, or if we bring this strategy to the table, we might be able to say to ourselves, I went down all these rabbit holes in my mind and I said to myself, oh my goodness, what if this happens when I go for my job interview? What if they laugh at me? What if I never get another call from any other company ever again? What if I get kicked off of LinkedIn? We go down all these rabbit holes and we think about all these scary, scary ideas. And then you come back to the table with that awareness and you say to yourself, like, consider, so I guess the actual name of the tactic that I'm talking about is like, consider the true importance of what's making you anxious, right? Is this job interview scaring you because you think that you're going to perform so poorly that everybody in the industry is going to basically blacklist you from ever getting interviewed again? Or are you just nervous that you're not going to get this one opportunity? The interview itself is not going to go the way that you want it to. And the reason why it's important, even though it sounds a little bit silly or whatever, the reason it's important to think about this logic is once we are able to say to ourselves, like, oh yeah, I guess I was going down all those rabbit holes and making myself feel really bad, we can then come back to the actual situation and say, you know what, look, okay, this is an interview that I care about. I want this job. But at the same time, I am making myself suffer way more than is warranted for this situation. Once we are able to make that distinction, we can then say to ourselves, like, look, I may even give myself permission to still be anxious about this. But all that, that rabbit holing I was doing and thinking about the worst case scenario happening and catastrophizing it and whatnot, Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So being able to just come back to the table and say, okay, what is really at stake here? And getting ourselves basically getting ourselves past that trick that our mind is trying to play on us. That can be really important as well.
Yeah, good. I like that. And I imagine some of the other things that you have suggested for people is that they should get out and move, that they can, just go take a walk, get out of your head and enjoy nature, ground yourself with the earth. If you can go near a body of water, if that soothes you, do that. I use meditation a lot with my clients, and when they're anxious about a situation or they're anxious about some future event, or they're living in a state of sort of adrenal fatigue because of anxiety, basically, is what brings that on, because the cortisol, you've changed your hormonal balance at this point based on anxiety. So meditation, just getting somewhere in your mind in a better place. And there's so many guided meditation apps that are out there that can be used, that you could do 5 minutes or an hour and a half, whatever suits your purpose. You can choose the subject, whether it's just let's have a good day, or manifesting abundance in your life, or gratitude. All kinds of things are out there now. There's so many resources for that kind of stuff. And of course, what I mentioned earlier is food, how you feed yourself, movement, food, sleep, when and how are you sleeping? What is the quality like? Are you giving yourself that advantage, or are you on, your electronics late at night, looking at your news feed, making yourself anxious and, not getting quality really beyond REM sleep? You have to look at, there's so many of those things that can actually help you with your everyday situations, because your body, your mind, your whole apparatus is going to be better prepared for things that come out you, and things that rather than put you into a dark place. So with the time we have left, I would love to talk about depression and your second book, which I haven't read. What are the suggestions there for people that are, because we're talking about not going on antidepressants, and what do you suggest that people can do for themselves through the book that you wrote?
For sure. So why don't we quickly hit kind of like micro and macro, if you will. So
okay.
I guess the reason why I want to talk about that, right, is when it comes to anxiety, right, I had talked about how getting that acute stress response to tamp down can basically reverse our anxiety or get it to go away for a little while. There isn't a similar mechanism with depression. And if you think about it, right, we say, when I gave the definition of depression being a pervasive state of helplessness and hopelessness, anxiety is more of a transient state, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like when you're in that pervasive state, it is harder to get out of. And thus, there aren't always like little tips and tricks. It's a little bit more of like, okay, philosophically, we're looking at our lives and we're thinking about the different things that have brought us to this state of depression, right? But at the same time, I don't want to leave folks hanging and say like, oh, it's this monstrous task of like rebuilding your entire life and whatnot just to combat depression. So let me start with the micro, which is sort of like in the moment, what are some things that you can do to make yourself feel a little bit better? And then we'll really quickly talk about the macro stuff. So on the micro level, and I'm going to skip some of the science here just because it's in my book. If you want to grab that.
We'll have to make that suggestion because we're down to 4 minutes. So you got to give us the quick version. Yeah.
So you can link to some of the studies in the book, but a couple quick tactics. So, people will say, and Debbie alluded to, is, exercising is so important when it comes to not only your mental health, but also depression. So getting on a regimented exercise plan can be crucial for your mental health. There are studies that show that it can be just as effective, if not more effective, in the treatment of depression than psychotropic drugs. So not saying that we should pick one or the other. Try them out, see what works for you. But the exercise piece is really important, especially just from a anecdotal standpoint of, being able to get yourself out of your head. Go for a run, right? And clear those thoughts. That's really important. Another quick one I just want to touch upon is taking a cold shower, sort of. I know this is a tough one. Not most people would not want to do that. But there is science that shows that getting into a cold body of water or having cold water splash on our skin can send an antidepressive effect up to our brains.
Hormesis.
So
it puts your body in the state of hormesis, which is a feel-good state. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, good
you.
stress.
Yeah.
All about that. And then so those are two quick things that listeners could do. And then on the more macro level, right? I talk about this model, and I'll sort of leave it on a cliffhanger because I know we're out of time. I talk about this model called the biopsychosocial model. It's basically just a holistic way of looking at diseases. And if you look at depression through that lens, we can say there are biological factors, there are psychological factors, and there are social factors to this disease. And so, starting to break down each of those buckets and say to ourselves, how can I improve my life in each of those areas? That can be really helpful for depression as well.
Love it. I like that. Yeah. And it's, those are tools. Those are things. Those are lifestyle things. And the thing is, I have a client who's 75 who suffered from depression most of her adult life. In the last 3 years, she's completely out of it. And is because it's never too late to change, is my point. She made lifestyle changes that helped her pull out of the depression and stay there. And it takes a while for those changes to develop, because we have to get more habitual about the things that weren't working with the things that will work with what you have in your book. In the time we have left, I want you to talk about any way somebody can work with you and how people can get your book, if that's, and how to reach you.
Yeah, I would just say go to getoutofyourhead.com. No dashes, no spaces in that. I think the link looks like it's showing on the video. The Instagram is just at Get Out of Your Head, but the website is getoutofyourhead.com. So please feel free to head to the website. You can find the books through there. You can find my blog there. There's a way to contact me and the rest of the team through there. So please do that. If you are looking on specific websites for the book, specifically Amazon, just be careful. There's another book of the same name out there that sells pretty well. So there has been confusion in the past as to which one is which. Just make sure you grab mine. Look for my name.
Yes, and I love this. Is what I love about you, Brian, is that you took, and I have a lot of guests on here that sort of make it their mission after they've gone through something to help other people. And there's a lot of, stuff that goes through our head that I'm going to write a book about this someday. I'm going to really help other people. And you actually did it. And you did it at a young age. And you did it very quickly after you experienced what, I know you first experienced anxiety. And then a couple of years later, you were in depression. And you've pulled yourself out of both places. And now you want to help other people with the things that worked for you. And you're very well researched, in spite of the fact that you're not a doctor. This makes you an expert in this field, in my estimation, based on the fact that you are so well researched and you're so passionate about it and have gone through it personally. It's not just, the school of. You actually lived it and then studied it to how you can help yourself and others. And I really appreciate that. And so I hope the audience appreciates that too, in wanting to work with you if they feel anything familiar here that they feel you can help them with. So I really appreciate that and your time and your expertise, but you're going to have to leave us with words of wisdom, final thought. It could be a word, a phrase, a sentence, just a final thought to leave us with today.
For sure. And I really appreciate you saying all that you just said. The mental health stuff means so much to me. I wouldn't have written the books that I did if I didn't. I'm not trying to, sound like a victim or anything like that. But if I wouldn't have written them if I didn't feel as though I had suffered the way that I had suffered. And I also wouldn't have written them if I didn't feel as though I could then take that suffering and use it for good to help other people. So on that note, I just want to say to folks who are listening, who are struggling, know that it can get better, and it most likely will. Keep fighting. I have a lot of respect for you. It's a tough battle, but at the same time, there are better days ahead. So my heart goes out to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. And thanks for being somewhat of a guinea pig for us to bring your expertise to the table here, literally in the form of 2 books. I highly suggest you guys go to Brian's website, getoutofyourhead.com, and check out those books. There's PDF versions. There's the Audible version, which is what I have. And they're very helpful. There's so many familiar things and Brian's got all these little stories and tidbits in there, and stories are always the best to help us because we can relate to those. So I want to thank you again, Brian, and I want to thank you, my audience. Please go and check out, if you like the show, if you have a comment, go ahead and give it a rating and make a comment, ask a question. Brian or I will get back to you. We'd love to keep the conversation going. If you're listening after the fact, even if you're listening live right now, get in touch with us. So in the meantime, I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks with a new show, but in the meantime, keep going out and having those conversations that connect to a healthier you. All right. Bye, everybody. Bye. Thank you.